So the reason for that, I think, is that there isn't a more upsetting psychological phenomenon than being betrayed. You stake yourself on someone, you trust them, they're now a foundation, they're part of the foundation of your life.
Completely.
Oh, so, and there's no worse form of betrayal than betrayal that's done in the name of the highest good, right? I mean,
Yes.
there can't be, obviously.
Yes.
Okay, so, all right, so I thought that sin against the Holy Ghost was something like rejection of the Abrahamic call. You know, God comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. He says, go out into the world, leave your zone of comfort, move away from your people, and have the terrible adventure of your life. Well, if you reject that, you can't develop.
Yes.
Right? Because you're rejecting the spirit of learning
And think of how
yourself.
many young men are rejecting it every day.
Well, what's terrible about that, this is something we could talk about too. I'm curious about your experience. It's been my experience that it doesn't take that much encouragement for the people you're describing to be inspired to try. Now, I've talked to thousands of young men now who've had that experience, you know, like I see a lot of them at my lectures. They come to the meet and greets, for example, and they tell me, it's great. It's really great. They tell me that, you know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, because it's starting to be a long time now, 8 years ago even, they were not in good shape. And they came across my lectures or books and decided that there was something worth aiming for, and then decided to try. So to tell the truth, that's a very common vow, let's say, to take on more responsibility. And they usually laugh about starting to make their bed or something like that, which is a lot less trivial than people think. And then it's straighten them out. The terrible thing is how little encouragement that actually took. And so why are people coming out to see you on campuses, and what kind of response do you get from the people that you talk to?
The responses have been incredible. First, the crowds alone, we're drawing crowds of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in the middle of the day just for me to debate a random college kid or a college professor. It's remarkable.
So walk me through one of those events, Charlie.
And so I've been doing that for a decade. So I started, as we know, we started Turning Point USA. One of the things I really wanted to make sure is that I was in touch with the target audience that I was trying to convince and trying to persuade. No better way to do that than just go to the college campus itself, set up a card table with, you know, maybe a poster that says something like, you know, I think government should be smaller, something like that, and start a discussion. I would do this at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I would do this at University of Illinois when we had almost no funding, no connections, no idea what I was doing. I've always believed in the grassroots interaction. Similar to your meet and greets. No data, no chart, no abstraction can get to that personal human-to-human contact. So I've been doing that for many years. And then Steven Crowder, to his credit, kind of popularized this idea of debating and putting it on. I said, oh, well, why don't I also film these interactions? And so I started to do that around 2018. So it's been about 7 or 8 years now. And, you know, then 10 kids would show up and then 20 kids. And we started to put these on the internet, and kind of concurrent and simultaneous to your rise, where you diagnosed what was going on in the West quicker and more accurately than anybody else, especially with young men. We started to see our popularity increase as we started to address some of the underlying problems that young people were facing, but in particular, young men were facing. And then COVID happened, and we were basically out of business for, you know, a year, in the sense where we weren't able to do campus activities. Donald Trump was no longer in office, and we had to really kind of rebuild on campus basically about 2 years ago. So let's just say the spring of 2023, things really started to change, where we would do these campus events prior, and we would bring in your traditional conservatives, 300 to 400 people, maybe a couple 100 interested types, maybe 50 liberals, 500 students, call it a day. That's a success. All of a sudden in 2023, we were drawing a different type of person and student. First of all, we were drawing people outside of the campuses that were welders, electricians, and plumbers, and the working men that heard that we were in town, and they just
How'd they hear?
Social media.
Okay.
And so decentralized promotion. And so they would show up. And I saw that. I mean, these were guys that would go up to the question line, and they were not asking about Rousseau, or they were not asking about Jacques Derrida.
Yeah.
They were saying, how do I be a better person because I'm expecting a daughter in 6 months?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And all of a sudden, here I am, you know, not in the position where you are, nearly as seasoned to give advice to that young man, but he's searching and he's looking for anyone that seems to have an idea of how the world is supposed to work, that is professing a worldview of order and structure and discipline.
Something that he could do.
Yes, and then he was looking to me for advice, and that was a different dynamic. Whereas prior, all the questions the last 8 years before that were, hey, Charlie, what do you think about the tax rate? What do you think about abortion?
Right.
And I still get a lot of that, but it was something different. It was young men especially that were seeking purpose and seeking a destination.
So this is crucially important, this transformation, because one of the things that, so let's go back to that 60s dynamic, that anti-authoritarian 60s dynamic. The role of the left in the 60s was like an entrepreneurial progressive radicalism, let's say. And the stance of the conservative was, well, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, guys. And that's a pretty good dynamic because you need a force for change and you need a force that resists that. But I think what the conservatives did wrong, like profoundly wrong, was that their brakes, this is why they're always dismissed as reactionary, their brakes, B-R-A-K-E-S, their brakes were fundamentally, they're also moralistic. It was finger wagging. And this is something that was distasteful, let's say, especially about the hypocritical, evangelical conservative types.
I agree with that.
Okay, but it was also strategically inappropriate because it's very hard to say to young people who might tilt in the progressive direction, because they're a little more revolutionary in spirit, let's say, or also a little more immature, that the reason that to abstain sexually, for example, is because you shouldn't do it. Now that's true, but it's a weak argument. I was talking to my wife this morning about this. We'd been apart for a few days and I saw her again yesterday and I was very happy about that. And she has a podcast. She's trying to reach out to young women because they're just as or more trouble.
They're in more
young men.
turmoil.
They're just harder to talk to by a lot. Our discussion centered around the fact that it isn't that you should get married, although you should. It's that there is no alternative that's anywhere near as good by any standard whatsoever, regardless of position of analysis or time length. Anything you do other than that, even though marriage is very difficult and every other alternative is far, far worse. And so if you want a pathway forward to what the conservatives support, the conservatives should be offering an invitation. They shouldn't be moralizing. And so you're saying that they shouldn't even be political at the moment. And I know you're a figure whose political activity is grounded in a religious substrate.
Right. That's right.
Shapiro's, of course, like that too, and Dennis Prager.
Christianity is my foundation.
Right. And so now you're seeing that these young men who are coming, especially the working class types, they're not so interested in the political. They're probably not even interested in the arguments exactly. They're looking for something else.
That's right. They're looking for direction. They're looking for connection. They're also looking for validation that the way they're thinking and the way they're feeling is directionally correct. That it's so that having a direction is correct. Yeah, exactly.
For example.
That not meandering through life.
Yeah.
Not having the aimless despair of walking in circles.
Yeah, not castrating yourself so your toxic masculinity vanishes.
Bingo.
And sometimes literally, far too often now, literally.
They're chopping off parts.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what we saw in 2023, again, so I have to wear multiple hats. Part of my hat is a political strategist. Part of my hat is just trying to be a role model for young people. Part of my hat is explaining these ideas to young people. I kind of connected all the dots. I said, 2024 is going to be a rebellion of the men of the West, unlike any that we've ever seen. And I would say this to the experts, and they would dismiss it. They said, no. Because Roe versus Wade got repealed, remember, that either that summer or summer 2022. I can't remember. It might have been, irrelevant. The point being is that Roe versus Wade was supposed to be the most important political issue of 2024, and that women were going to rise up in major numbers. I said, first of all, that might be true on one side of the sex spectrum. On the other side, or binary, the other side, there is something happening with men that no one is talking about, no one wants to acknowledge, no one wants to admit. And so separately, the Trump team, to their credit, believed in it and actually ran an explicitly masculine campaign going on podcasts like Joe Rogan and Theo Von. And so they were very much embracing of this, to their credit. But separately, we must diagnose, why is this happening? And the education system, as you've astutely pointed out many times, is hyper feminine. There's no place for young men, especially young white men of a Christian persuasion.
I think it's 1 in 4 boys is now given an ADHD diagnosis. Correct. It's something
and
like
even
that.
the New York Times has said this is for parents, not for kids.
Yeah.
Meaning there's no medicinal reason for this to happen, according to the New York Times.
Yeah, right. So things have gone particularly sideways when the
I
New York
encourage people
Times
to read this cover story. It was unbelievable, where they were basically saying, after this major study, that like 1% of the kids actually do need ADHD medication that are completely out of control. But almost like 90 to 95% are just because the parents don't want to have an unruly kid around.
Yeah, and if that's the New York Times diagnosis, then you can also be absolutely 100% certain that they underplay the role of the educational establishment in setting up the circumstances so that parents are likely to draw that conclusion. I mean, with all this trans butchery nightmare, my profession, particularly the social work end of it, but my real psychologists, let's say, were also stunningly craven in their unwillingness to resist this. The mantra was to parents, well, would you rather have a live trans child or a dead child? Which there was never, Charlie, a shred of evidence for that.
It's one of the most evil things that has happened.
It is unbelievable. The people who promoted that should be imprisoned.
I agree.
It's absolutely
and it's
brutal.
widespread, and it's still in the fibers of the pediatric community.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It really is.
For sure. Well, the Supreme Court of the UK may have broken the back of that movement a week ago.
Remarkably.
That was unbelievable. That was one of the most... Now and then the Brits, God love them, do something quite radical in the right direction.
Right?
Brexit was a good example of that.
Oh, that's interesting.
They put through that free speech legislation that the Labour Party tried to rescind that has actually reshaped the universities to some substantial degree. That was in part a consequence of me being disinvited from Cambridge, which had a long-term consequence that the disinviters hadn't really reckoned on, because a whole group of professors at Cambridge got together and decided that they were going to change the policies at Cambridge, which they did in a historic vote, and then they changed the policies at the national level. And the repercussions of that haven't stopped yet. But so this terrible demoralization, right? So, all right, now you're being called, you're advertising on social media. Let's go back and tell this whole story. So, because I'm very curious about it. So you had an intuition that you could go to campuses. Okay, so tell me where'd that idea come from? Do you think?
Well, I never went to college, first of all, which is...
Right, you've been to many colleges.
I've been to more colleges than most people. You might have me beat, but I've been to well over 200 campuses across the country.
No, you've got me beat.
Yeah, I mean, almost every college you can imagine. I've either given a lecture, a speech, or started a chapter there.
Yeah. So my daughter doesn't have a university degree, so she started a university. So that's very
good.
comical.
Exactly.
I know, but this is good. Okay, so that means you do have a university education. You just got it a very different way.
That's right.
Okay, so you decided. That's interesting too, because it's like I asked you what your motivation for doing this was, and the first thing you said was that you didn't have a degree. So that's very interesting. So what, were you also curious about going to campuses?
Yes, and that's really a great point. So just as a little background, I wanted to go to West Point. I didn't get in. I told my parents I would take a gap year to kind of figure this out, because I saw some momentum of a local political group that was out of the cookie group, by the way.
Okay.
That kind of kept growing. I said, I want to keep this going and play this out, see where this can be.
This was after high school, after high school.
Yeah, that's correct. That was the summer I graduated high school.
Okay.
A really amazing mentor by the name of Bill Montgomery, may he rest in peace, was the only guy ever. He said, Charlie, you shouldn't go to college. I was like, that's the most radical thing someone could say. So that idea was planted in my head. And I said, okay, I'll just take a gap year. I'll kind of figure things out.
Why did he tell you that?
He thought, in his own words, he sensed an entrepreneurial gift and skill that I had. and a drive. He was a kind of an entrepreneur himself. Started
so he could see the entrepreneurial part of you, and he didn't think that would work well in college.
Yeah, and he said, you have to go create, not just go.
Oh, good. Oh, that was good.
What he said.
I see. Okay.
You have to go build. He said, you have something in you. You have a drive. You have a passion. You have a relentless kind of spirit. And he says, you shouldn't go to college. And that was the most radical thing that a suburban kid in Chicago could hear, because everyone would go to college.
Of course.
It's a mark of failure not to go to college.
Yeah,
and so not getting into West Point was very demoralizing. However, it was the greatest gift ever from the Lord, because I took the gap year, and to your credit, which is no one's ever put this together, all my friends were in college. So I would start visiting my friends in colleges. So you think about it, because I would go to high school, I would graduate high school, I still am friends with all my high school friends. So I'd go to University of Iowa, University of Illinois to go visit them, Northwestern. And I realized as I was trying to get this political thing off the ground, this is where it all stemmed from. And I was trying to put pieces together that the academy was where the fight needed
definitely.
To go towards. Yeah. And simultaneously, as I was trying to find funding and trying to get donors behind our effort, something that almost every wealthy person that I would encounter is they had a soft spot and a interest in trying to invest in college campuses, especially conservative-leaning philanthropists and business types in America. I think about 2012.
That's turned around to bite them pretty damn hard.
Oh yeah, but it would get their attention, right? So here I would be at a cocktail party, and I'd be 18, 19 years old trying to get funding, trying to get someone's attention. They say, okay, what do you do? I said, well, I'm trying to bring conservatism to college campuses. Oh, really? And they would be sincere. They would lean in.
Right.
They'd say, well, what about my alma mater? Have you spoke there? And so I'd have a little connection. I'd say, well, maybe I could visit there if we have a little bit of money. And so it helped. So I had interest from the donor community.
So you could see that there was an opening there, a door that was opening.
And I had no idea how big that opening was. And the more that I learned, some of these donors, as you would say, they'd give hundreds of millions of dollars to these schools.
Yeah, right.
And so they had a lot of vested interest. They were very curious about a young guy that wants to go shake up these campuses. Because remember, that's when woke was really starting to come up.
Yeah.
13, 14, 15, we saw it bubble up.
For sure.
15 was, I think, the Pearl Harbor moment. It was Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, hands up, don't shoot. That's where woke started to present itself in.
Oh, you'll have to tell me why you think that event was
at least from the, because I think at the top of all woke elements, race was the primary, let's just say the primary fencing.
Yeah, it's the division point.
Correct. And so in 2015, when Ferguson, Missouri, the lie, the scam of hands up, don't shoot with Michael Brown, Black Lives Matter was born out of Ferguson, Missouri, actually on a college campus at University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. And that spread like wildfire through, of course, a lot of Democrat operatives and money being spent. Remember how long we spent on that news cycle of America's racist because of Michael Brown, and all the CNN commentators famously said, hands up and don't shoot. And we spent more time on race obsession in the last 2 years of Obama's presidency than the last 4 or 5 years prior. Yeah. And that's because—
Well, that's a hallmark of the danger of allowing race to be an issue in the presidency to begin with.
Exactly. But an underappreciated element here is Eric Holder was setting the table for that, with very loyal people in the Department of Justice that believed that police were inherently racist.
Right.
They were launching investigations into very successful police departments trying to find police brutality and racial bias. And so the table was set, and that was the mini George Floyd moment of the beginning of woke.
And you know, psychologists played a role in that in a major way too, because you had Banaji and her crowd with the what do they call that? The implicit association test, completely forcing the idea of implicit bias. You know, and social psychology is a very corrupt discipline, and it has been maybe from its onset. And it's stacked from top to bottom with careerists. And it was social psychologists, for example, who denied that there was any such thing as left-wing authoritarianism until 2017. Right. That was something you didn't get to think if you were a social psychologist or even investigate. We cracked that. There was a couple of people working on it around 2016. The last bit of research I did was on left-wing authoritarianism, and then my lab blew up. You know, it just became impossible for me to continue. But so that dovetailed with this insistence that people were looking at the world through a lens that was irremediably biased in terms of their privilege and their racial and ethnic identity. And, and it's tricky because people do have a tilt in the ethnocentric direction, right? Because, well, how about because you favor your family, right? You tend to favor the local. You also tend to favor the non-novel.
And the familiar.
Well, exactly. And now there are exceptions to that. Well, you see this in the Old Testament accounts because sometimes the foreigner is the best thing that ever happened. So that would be like Jethro in the story of Moses' father-in-law.
Of course, and Midian.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the alternative that would be like Jezebel, who's the foreign devil, so to speak.
Of course.
And so, that's a paradox that's very difficult to properly navigate. Okay, so yeah, it's 2015, 2016, things went like seriously sideways. Okay,
and that's where, just to complete the point, my job on campuses became far more interesting because our organization shifted from primarily, economic discussions of Marxism and capitalism to core cultural hotbed topics in 15, 16, 17, race, and then, of course, the next layer, gender, transgenderism. So the beast that Betty Friedan and Judith Butler raised, that monster, reared its head with incredible ferocity in 16 and 17 in the academy. And people don't believe it when I say this. I saw this happen. No, it's okay. Just really quick. In 2012, 2013, there was almost no transgender anything on these campuses. It didn't exist. I could tell you, I went to these campuses. I talked to these students. You might have an effeminate looking guy maybe wearing a dress as a joke. It was not anywhere. The social contagion within 5 years was dramatic. It was a different place. You went from just, okay, you are who you are to, you're not going to use my pronouns, hyper tyrannical, hyper authoritarian. So then here we are, a 5-year-old organization with a growing infrastructure and a growing presence and a growing staffing, organization. And we multiplied significantly because then the donor types, like, hold on, what happened to my alma mater? Why is it that they're burning down UC Berkeley? Remember, Milo Yiannopoulos went to University of California, Berkeley in the spring of 17, and they burnt the whole place down. Ben Shapiro very similarly. And so we then found ourselves accidentally or through serendipity on the front lines of the American culture war.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that's not accidental. You think about the way that you told your story. I mean, it's improbable, but you were of the temperamental type. That's that strange blend of entrepreneurial temperament and conservative temperament. Those things don't generally go together, right? The conservative temperament, you could accept the libertarians because they're probably the entrepreneurial conservatives.
And growing up, I actually was more libertarian. It's very interesting to say that.
Okay. Because that's where the entrepreneurial conservatives hang out, is with the libertarians.
That's right.
Right, and they have an uneasy alliance with
That's a great point.
Okay,
it really
okay.
is.
And so that temperamental factor was already operating at you in high school. And then you didn't get into West Point, you said, but you were interested in universities and you obviously had the intelligence to manage them. And so, it's very useful to develop an idiosyncratic pathway forward if you have the IQ horsepower to manage it, because it makes you unique if you could do that. So, okay, and so you had a mentor who told you that it's probably best for you not to go to college because you have an entrepreneurial bent. Now you're trying to build a political organization, but you're not exactly sure how. You're visiting the campuses and you have friends there, and you see that there's an opportunity to talk on campuses where you can also get an education in doing that, but also that there's donor interest. And that's very interesting too, because if you're a good entrepreneur, one of the things you do is you go talk to your marketplace always. That's the grassroots things, but also with regards to fundraisers. And you offer like 10 ideas, all of which you're interested in, and you see where the door opens. That's knocking.
Exactly right.
And so you saw that there were these people who wanted to support the education of young people, but who could see that their money was being counterproductively spent.
To say the least.
Yeah. Well, leave large piles of money laying around unguarded and see who comes in first to take it. Right. That's that parasitical type
That's right.
They'll swarm in there like mad. That's happened in all the
And they gravitate to the
foundations.
universities.
Yeah, well, it's the same phenomena that we talked about earlier, that cluster B, narcissistic, dark tetrad, 4% of the population. They're looking around to see where, what would you say, inhabitable carcasses are lying around unintended.
And they're disproportionately represented at the academy.
Yeah.
That 4% might be 40% of the administrators or the professor types. Because think about it.
Increasingly that became the case.
Because they might be saying something to that target audience, the student, but they actually want to see that student become a leftist. There's a lot of Machiavellian influences in how these professors present their ideas.
Yeah, well, it's also the case that it was the Machiavellian So what happened at the university, I watched this, that
you lived it.
The administration encroached. And that's not surprising because there was money at afoot. So why wouldn't there be competition for the funding? So the administrators, who are generally failed faculty, by the way, failed and embittered faculty. So the faculty are already embittered because they're not rich like investment bankers. And then you take embittered faculty members who couldn't make it as faculty.
Perfectly said.
So now they encroach on the faculty who are too busy doing their job and too apolitical and also too willfully blind to notice. The administration encroaches decision by decision until they radically outnumber the professors. And that's pretty much fait accompli by 2005, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then the woke mob took over the administration.
That's right.
And that took no time at all. Right. And so now that's where we're at in the universities, and I can't see how that would be reversed.
It cannot.
Okay, so now tell me how you started going to campuses and what you did to begin with and how you got away with it.
So the first person who wrote us a check was a guy by the name of Foster Fries. May he also rest in peace. Amazing philanthropist. I met him very early on. I decided to go to the Republican National Convention in 2012 in pursuit of finding donors. This was August after I graduated high school. And I just had this idea to try to bring the conservative agenda to young people, to the next generation. I met him in a stairwell at the Republican National Convention. I gave him a stairwell pitch. And to your point, which is exactly right, I kind of presented 4 or 5 things really quickly.
Yeah.
No one trained it. I just kind of instinctively, I said, well, here's 5 ideas that I have. He laughed, he chuckled, gave me his business card. He said, be in touch. Sent me $10,000 the next week. That was like
How did you know
$10
that
million.
there was such a thing as finding donors? And what do you think it was that set you up to have the gall to assume you could do, first of all, to know that that was a thing, and then to have the gall to pursue it?
The second one, I don't know. I don't know where I got the gall to pursue it. I will say Bill Montgomery, being a mentor of mine, was very encouraging.
Okay. So you had someone encouraging you.
Yes.
And you said he saw something in you.
Yes. And he was
an entrepreneur.
Yes. And he never asked for anything from me, which was very unique. It wasn't like he was trying to have some agenda. He was 72 years old.
So you had a mentor,
yes,
which you desperately need as a young person, definitely. You need someone who believes that you can do it.
And you think about it, you're 18 years old, you don't know how to cash checks. You don't know, you barely know how to put on a tie. Literally, I didn't know how to tie a tie for the first 2 years, at Turning Point. Again, my parents are phenomenal and they deserve a lot of credit. But this was kind of a beyond the upbringing where an external mentor comes in and kind of points you and says, hey, I think you're really good at this, found a skill, identified a skill, and kind of molded me in that direction.
You know that young male elephants go mad if there's no old male elephant to butt heads with them. That's very well documented.
It's very apropos for Republicans.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, definitely.
So,
yeah.
But it was, I'm a quick learner, I'm a quick study. And so I started to do research. I said, well, are there things such as external nonprofit political organizations? Oh, there's a 501c3 or there's a 501c4 and you can raise money. And so the first couple months was me actually learning, what am I building? Am I building?
So you were training as an administrator and a manager then too?
I was everything for the first.
Yeah, of course.
I was CEO, I was janitor, I was everything.
Yeah.
And so I had to make a decision. Of course, I asked for advice. Am I going to start a for-profit company? Am I doing we decided on nonprofit, largely because we believed that there was an untapped pool of philanthropic dollars that wanted to see these campuses challenged and disrupted. And
how do you figure that out?
having a lot of conversations with a lot of wealthy people. And I realized that So if you talk to a donor type, they'll have two different ways of deploying capital in their after years. The first of which is investment, which comes with strict return on investment.